Chapter 13. The Labor Market in the Macroeconomy. Chapter Objectives. You have 5 minutes to read summary, P280, and then, there will be a short quiz. Chapter Objectives. 1. Are classical economists ones who listen to Mozart? 2. Is it possible that involuntary unemployment does not exist? How can this be? 3. Does sticky wages refer to paychecks with gum on them? Chapter Objectives. 1. Are classical economists ones who listen to Mozart? Answer. Classical economists believe that wages adjust in the labor market so the quantity demanded of labor equals the quantity supplied. In this view, unemployment consists only of frictional and structural components. Chapter Objectives. 2. Is it possible that involuntary unemployment does not exist? How can this be? Answer. According to classical economists, unemployment increases when the demand for labor declines because some people are not willing to accept the lower equilibrium wage rate, preferring to try to find work at higher wages. In this view, these people are voluntarily unemployed. Chapter Objectives. 3. Does sticky wages refer to paychecks with gum on them? Answer. Wages may be more flexible in the upward direction than in the downward direction. In other words, wages seem to be sticky downward. If wages do not fall readily, declines in the demand for labor will result in unemployment. Chapter Objectives. 4. How can an increase in the minimum wage cause unemployment? 5. Are there other reasons for unemployment? 6. Is there such a thing as having too little unemployment? Is there a downside to having lots of people working? Chapter Objectives. 4. How can an increase in the minimum wage cause unemployment? An effective minimum wage raises wages above the equilibrium wage rate. This causes a surplus in the labor market. This surplus is called unemployment. Chapter Objectives. 5. Are there other reasons for unemployment? Answer. The efficiency wage theory maintains that employers may pay wages higher than the equilibrium wage rate. This will cause some unemployment. Another theory claims that imperfect information exists in the labor market and that firms, not knowing the equilibrium wage rate, may offer wages above this rate. Chapter Objectives. 6. Is there such a thing as having too little unemployment? Is there a downside to having lots of people working? Answer. If unemployment falls too low, wages and prices may start to rise. Too little unemployment, therefore, can lead to an increase in inflation. The labor market, basic concepts. The unemployment rate is the ratio of the number of people unemployed to the total number of people in the labor force. Cyclical unemployment is the increase in unemployment that occurs during recessions and depressions. The labor market, basic concepts. Frictional unemployment is the portion of unemployment that is due to the normal working of the labor market. used to denote short-run job/skill matching problems. The labor market, basic concepts. Structural unemployment is the portion of unemployment that is due to changes in the structure of the economy that result in a significant loss of jobs in certain industries. The classical view of the labor market. According to classical economists, the quantity of labor demanded and supplied are brought into equilibrium by rising and falling wage rates. There should be no persistent unemployment above the frictional and structural amount. The classical view of the labor market. If labor demand decreases, the equilibrium wage will fall. Anyone who wants a job at W1 will have one. There is always full employment in this sense. The classical labor market and the aggregate supply curve. The classical idea that wages adjust to clear the labor market is consistent with the view that wages respond quickly to price changes. This means that the S-curve is vertical. When the S-curve is vertical, monetary and fiscal policy cannot affect the level of output and employment in the economy. The unemployment rate and the classical view. The unemployment rate is not necessarily an accurate indicator of whether the labor market is working properly. The unemployment rate may sometimes seem high even though the labor market is working well. Explaining the existence of unemployment. The fact that people are willing to work at a wage higher than the current wage does not mean that the labor market is not working. The term sticky wages refers to the downward rigidity of wages as an explanation for the existence of unemployment. Explaining the existence of unemployment. If wages stick at W0 rather than fall to the new equilibrium wage of W asterisk following a shift of demand, the result will be unemployment equal to L0 minus L1. Explaining the existence of unemployment. One explanation for downwardly sticky wages is that firms enter into social, or implicit, contracts. These contracts are unspoken agreements between workers and firms that firms will not cut wages. Explaining the existence of unemployment. The efficiency wage theory is an explanation for unemployment that holds that the productivity of workers increases with the wage rate. If this is so, firms may have an incentive to pay wages above the market clearing rate. Explaining the existence of unemployment. If firms have imperfect information, they may simply set wages wrong, wages that do not clear the labor market. Explaining the existence of unemployment. Minimum wage laws set a floor for wage rates, and explain at least a fraction of unemployment. The short-run relationship between the unemployment rate and inflation. In the short run, the unemployment rate, U, and aggregate output, income, Y, are negatively related. The short-run relationship between the unemployment rate and inflation. 1. As depicted by this short-run S-curve, the relationship between Y and the price level, P, is positive. 2. the relationship between U and P is negative. As U declines in response to the economy moving closer and closer to capacity output, the overall price level rises more and more. The Phillips curve. 1. The Phillips curve shows the relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. 2. The inflation rate is the percentage change in the price level. The Phillips curve. There is a trade-off between inflation and unemployment. To lower the inflation rate, we must accept a higher unemployment rate. The Phillips curve. A historical perspective. In the 1960s and early 1970s, inflation appeared to respond in a fairly predictable way to changes in the unemployment rate. The Phillips curve. A historical perspective. But in the 1970s and 1980s, the Phillips curve broke down. The points on this figure show no particular relationship between inflation and unemployment. Expectations and the Phillips curve. Expectations are self-fulfilling. This means that wage inflation is affected by expectations of future price inflation. Price expectations that affect wage contracts eventually affect prices themselves. Expectations and the Phillips curve. Inflationary expectations shift the Phillips curve to the right. Inflationary expectations were stable in the 1950s and 1960s, but increased in the 1970s. The long run S curve, potential GDP, and the natural rate of unemployment. When output is pushed above potential GDP, Y0, there is upward pressure on costs. Rising costs push the short run S curve to the left. The quantity supplied will end up back at Y0. The long run S curve, potential GDP, and the natural rate of unemployment. In the long run, the Phillips curve corresponds to the natural rate of unemployment. The non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment. Many economists believe the relationship between the change in the inflation rate and the unemployment rate is as depicted by the PP curve in this figure. The non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, narrow. To the left of the narrow, the price level is accelerating, positive changes in the inflation rate. The non-accelerating inflation rate of unemployment, narrow. A favorable shift of the PP curve is to the left because the PP curve crosses zero at a lower unemployment